12,000 years ago, long before the foundation of the very first city, long before the first seeds were sown in a cultivated field, and certainly long before any human hand carved the first written word into clay, someone decided to build a temple. They erected massive stone pillars up to 6 meters tall, adorned them with precise, intricate animal carvings, and arranged them with a clear, deliberate architectural intention. And then, after pouring unimaginable labor and engineering into this monumental achievement, they did something completely inexplicable. They buried it, deliberately, purposely hiding their masterpiece under the earth. This place truly exists. It was found, it has been studied by experts for decades, and to this very day, no one can definitively explain how it was built, or more importantly, why. But that archaeological anomaly is only the first layer of a much deeper mystery that we are going to explore. You have probably heard some of these legendary names before: Göbekli Tepe, the Voynich Manuscript, Amelia Earhart, the Bermuda Triangle, the Zodiac Killer, and you probably believe they are simply unsolved mysteries, isolated anomalies in the fabric of history. But there is one question almost no one ever asks about them, and it is a question that changes absolutely everything. The real question is not what actually happened. The question is, why can't we stop asking about them? Because once you understand the psychological mechanism behind that question, you will realize that the greatest enigma of all isn't buried in the ancient past, lost in the ocean, or hidden in a cipher. It is hidden deep inside us. If you stay until the end of this journey, you will discover the unsettling truth about the human mind and why our civilization is utterly obsessed with the unknown. For decades, the academic world believed we knew exactly where and when civilization began. The consensus pointed directly to Mesopotamia, roughly 4,000 years before Christ. We believed that was the dawn of cities, the invention of writing, and the establishment of organized social hierarchy. It was a perfectly logical sequence. First, human beings learned to farm the land and domesticate animals. Then, having secured a stable food source, they built communities and cities. Only then, with the resources of a society, did they raise grand monuments. That was the official timeline of human history. It made perfect sense. Until 1994, that was the year a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt began excavating a seemingly unremarkable hill in southeastern Turkey. What his team found beneath the soil completely shattered that established timeline and rewrote human history. They uncovered Göbekli Tepe, a site carbon dated to between 9,600 and 8,200 BC. They found dozens of massive T-shaped pillars, some reaching up to 6 meters tall, weighing many tons. They found reliefs of foxes, lions, scorpions, and vultures carved with remarkable artistic precision. They found a complex of circular chambers arranged with a clear, sophisticated architectural intent. But the most shocking revelation was the identity of the builders. All of this was constructed by hunter-gatherers. These were people without permanent cities, without agriculture, without the wheel, without writing. The prevailing theory dictated that monuments came after civilization. Here, at Göbekli Tepe, the monument came first, suggesting that the urge to worship and gather actually birthed civilization itself. And then came a detail that rarely makes the mainstream headlines. Acoustic analysis of these ancient chambers revealed resonance patterns that do not appear to be accidental in the slightest. Researchers discovered unusual, highly specific echoes within the stone circles. This led to the proposition that sound was a central element to the site's function, implying that the chambers were specifically designed to amplify certain frequencies during ancient rituals. This isn't just a monumental archaeological discovery. It is hard evidence that these prehistoric people weren't merely surviving the harsh elements of their world. They were engineering complex, immersive experiences. But if Göbekli Tepe violently shook the timeline of archaeology, what comes next challenged something far older and more ingrained in us: the absolute certainty that the past can always be read and understood. In 1912, a rare book dealer named Wilfred Voynich purchased a collection of old, dusty manuscripts from a Jesuit college in Italy. Hidden among them was a book unlike absolutely anything that had ever existed on Earth. 240 pages of thick vellum, an entirely unknown, seemingly alien language, detailed colorful illustrations of bizarre plants that do not exist anywhere in botanical records, astronomical and astrological star charts that match no known celestial map in our sky, strange depictions of naked human figures submerged in elaborate circular liquid-filled structures connected by intricate networks of tubes. This became known as the Voynich Manuscript. Modern carbon dating has placed its creation between 1404 and 1438, yet its origin remains completely unknown. Its author remains completely unknown. Its purpose remains completely unknown. Over the past century, the most brilliant codebreakers from both world wars studied every single page. Computational linguists ran modern, sophisticated algorithms against its text. Master mathematicians analyzed the statistical patterns of the strange writing, looking for linguistic syntax. None of them reached a consensus. Some experts argue it is an incredibly elaborate hoax, a book meticulously designed to look coded but containing absolutely no real meaning. Others hypothesize it is a constructed, invented language, Still, others believe it might be the sole surviving example of an entirely extinct tongue. But there is one crucial dimension of this case that heated debates about its origin almost always overlook. Detailed chemical analyses of the inks and pigments have raised intense questions about exactly where and when the manuscript was physically produced. There are visible repair marks on the binding, proving that someone restored it, carefully and expensively, sometime during the Middle Ages. The physical book passed through the hands of at least 5 known collectors over the centuries, and each one of them deliberately preserved it. For over 600 years, someone, somewhere, always thought this bizarre book was worth keeping safe. The fundamental problem was never just about deciphering the text. The terrifying problem is that we don't even know what we are looking for. The manuscript forces us to confront our profound discomfort with a message that refuses to be understood. This refusal of closure brings us to the summer of 1937, when Amelia Earhart was arguably the most famous person in the air. She had boldly crossed the Atlantic Ocean entirely alone. She had shattered 6 different world records. She was the shining symbol of a generation that truly believed the sky had no limits and that human courage could conquer the globe. In June of that year, she set out on her absolute most ambitious mission yet, to circumnavigate the globe along the perilous equatorial route. On July 2nd, somewhere over the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific Ocean, her final radio transmissions were received. They were fragmented. They were confused. She reported running low on fuel and being unable to find her target island. And then, complete and total silence. The official search and rescue operation launched by the United States government lasted 16 agonizing days. It was the most expensive and extensive search in American history up to that point, covering thousands of square miles of ocean. They found absolutely nothing. The logical conclusion was drawn. The plane ran out of fuel, crashed into the deep ocean, and sank to the bottom. Case closed. The world mourned and moved on. But in 1988, a dedicated team of researchers began investigating a remote, uninhabited coral atoll in the Central Pacific called Nikumaroro. And what they found there raised horrifying new questions and unearthed things that simply shouldn't have been there. They discovered records of human bones found on the island in 1940. Bones with morphology that experts stated were consistent with a woman of European descent and Earhart's specific stature. They found aluminum fragments with exact measurements matching the precise window panel of Earhart's specific Lockheed Electra aircraft model. They uncovered period-accurate artifacts scattered on the desolate island, a sewing kit, a vintage glass cosmetic jar, and the distinct soles of women's shoes. This was chilling evidence strongly suggesting that someone survived the initial crash. But for how long did they survive? Under what horrific conditions on a sun-baked waterless atoll with what dwindling hope? While the analyses of these artifacts are still hotly contested and no definitive, undeniable proof has been officially confirmed, this hypothesis completely shifted the nature of the mystery. It transformed a swift, tragic aviation accident into something far heavier and far more disturbing. The agonizing possibility that Amelia Earhart survived the crash, waited desperately for a rescue on a deserted island, and slowly died waiting while planes searched hundreds of miles away, and no one ever arrived in time to save her. This terrifying concept of vanishing into thin air leads us directly to a zone of no return. Just 4 months after the conclusion of World War II, in December of 1945, 5 heavily armed Avenger bombers took off from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was supposed to be a completely routine training mission. 15 highly experienced military aviators were on board. The weather conditions were perfectly stable at departure. They never came back. The last radio transmissions from the formations leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, described a deeply unsettling scenario. His compasses were spinning uncontrollably. His instruments were giving impossible, contradictory readings, and the ocean looked wrong. He stated he couldn't recognize the Florida coastline below. He completely lost his bearings. A massive PBM Mariner flying boat was immediately dispatched as a search and rescue plane to find them. It also disappeared without a single trace. In total, 22 men and 6 aircraft vanished on that single day. The official Navy investigation ultimately concluded that navigational errors by the flight leader, combined with rapidly deteriorating weather conditions, caused the planes to ditch in the sea. A completely rational, logical explanation for a traumatic event. But there is a massive problem with rational explanations when it comes to the Bermuda Triangle. The specific geographical region spanning between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico handles significantly more air and sea commercial traffic than almost any other equivalent area on the entire planet. Statistically speaking, the number of disappearances in that zone is exactly proportional to the sheer volume of traffic passing through it. It is not exceptional in the slightest. The ocean is deep, the weather is volatile, and accidents happen. So why does the myth of the Bermuda Triangle persist so strongly in our culture? Because some stories become simply too large, too emotionally resonant, to fit neatly inside a cold, hard statistic. And because there is a fundamental flaw in the human mind that actively prefers a supernatural mystery to a mundane explanation. We want the world to be magical and dangerous, rather than random and tragic. This psychological need to construct narratives around the unknown was perfectly exploited in the autumn of 1968 in Northern California, when a series of brutal, seemingly random murders began that would completely paralyze the state with fear for years. The killer proudly named himself the Zodiac. He killed at least 5 innocent people, though he claimed to have killed dozens more. He was never caught, and his true identity was never definitively proven. But what made this specific case absolutely unlike any other serial killer in American history wasn't just the sheer brutality of the crimes, it was the extensive correspondence. The Zodiac actively sought the spotlight, sending detailed, arrogant, and articulate letters directly to newspaper offices. He taunted the police, he threatened the public, and most infamously, he included complex ciphers, intricately coded messages that he claimed contained his real name and identity. The first of these ciphers was surprisingly solved within a week by a local schoolteacher and his wife, who had absolutely no formal cryptography training. The decoded message did not contain his name. Instead, it spoke chillingly about the twisted pleasure he derived from killing. But the most complex and famous of his ciphers, the dreaded Z340, resisted every single attempt at decryption by the FBI, the CIA, and amateur sleuths for 51 long years. Finally, in December 2020, an international independent research group announced they had cracked the code using advanced software. The FBI officially confirmed their decryption. The terrifying message spoke about death, about maintaining control, and about his delusion that his victims would become his slaves in paradise. But even after half a century of waiting, the message revealed no name. And here's the fascinating, disturbing detail that transforms the Zodiac into something much larger than just an unsolved crime. Over the passing decades, the official investigation and amateur sleuths accumulated thousands of suspects, wildly conflicting theories, and mountains of supposed evidence, much of which was later completely discredited. Testimonies fell apart under scrutiny. Documents were proven unreliable. Confessions were fabricated. Some of the later Zodiac letters were even discovered to be outright forgeries created by people desperate for attention. Today, it is incredibly difficult to know exactly where the actual historical crime ends and where the massive, pervasive mythology that grew around it begins. The Zodiac is no longer just a man, he is a permanent ghost in the American psyche. And that phenomenon is not exclusive to the Zodiac Killer. It is the defining feature of all 5 of these extraordinary cases. There is a profound psychological pattern connecting these 5 mysteries that is very rarely discussed. The issue isn't the lack of evidence, it is the overwhelming excess of human interpretation. Göbekli Tepe deeply unsettled us because it directly contradicted the neat, linear narrative we desperately wanted to believe about our own ancestors and the birth of civilization. The Voynich Manuscript endlessly fascinates us because it directly challenges our arrogant faith that human intelligence can eventually break every single code and solve every puzzle. Amelia Earhart's disappearance continues to haunt us because she was the ultimate symbol of human progress and courage, and we needed her story to have a victorious ending, not a quiet, tragic fade into the ocean. Flight 19 and the Bermuda Triangle became a global legend because a sudden, accidental tragedy felt too meaningless, and we needed a grand, supernatural explanation worthy of the lives lost. And the Zodiac remains so vividly alive in the collective imagination because it is nearly impossible for our minds to accept that someone could inflict such terror, command such attention, and then simply vanish back into a normal, everyday life without facing justice. These enigmas do not exist despite our high human intelligence. They exist entirely because of it. We are the only species on this planet that actively manufactures massive mysteries from the unknown. We are the only creatures that fill the agonizing silence of the universe with complex narratives. We are the ones that turn the absence of a definitive answer into a permanent, obsessive question. And that profound inability to accept the void, that desperate need for meaning, it is the exact same evolutionary force that drove someone to painstakingly build a massive stone temple 12,000 years ago before agriculture even existed, to create a bizarre writing system that defies all modern decoding, and to courageously cross oceans entirely alone in pursuit of something greater. The real, ultimate mystery is not buried beneath the soil of an ancient ruin, or hidden in the ink of an encrypted manuscript, or lost in the depths of the Pacific Ocean. It lives in the psychological question that all of these stories share. Why do we need an answer so badly? I want to know what you think. Which of these 5 cases do you believe will never be solved? Tell me your theory in the comments below. And if you want to keep exploring the dark corners of human history, make sure to subscribe to Omen Myths to dive into our next mystery. Click the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there.